Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about why Bernie Sanders is losing so far. If you look at the exit polling for the states that have had their primaries so far, they ask them questions like, are people for Medicare for all? Are they for the Green New Deal? Things like that. And the interesting thing you see in those exit polls is that people are overwhelmingly in favor of the policies that Bernie Sanders wants to enact. But those same people are, for some reason, not voting for Bernie Sanders.
So are we just talking about the reasons, or...?
Yeah, like all of the things that play into that, and why people aren't voting for him, and also... I think we're gonna go into a little bit of like voter suppression and things like that. Obviously, those people that are not getting to vote aren't going to be at the exit polls, but there is a good deal of that going on as well.
Okay.
So I think one of the most important things that has gone into this is basically mainstream media shenanigans. They have been very negative towards Bernie Sanders basically since 2016. I mean, he dropped off their radar for a while after he lost the primary in 2016, but they started the negativity towards him in 2016, and they're back at it again with a vengeance. And for example, he's always portrayed as being a radical or unrealistic in the things that he wants to do on the news. How can we afford Medicare for all, or how can we afford to do the Green New Deal and all of this?
I love that people never stop and they say, what method are we going to use for paying for it? Instead, it's just immediately, it's outrageously expensive, while just accepting that the current system is okay, despite being outrageously awful.
Yeah, and it's horribly dishonest for them to portray him as being radical, because not only is he not radical at all if you look at like worldwide politics. Europe is obviously much more, they have a lot more socialist programs than we do, but he's not even that radical if you look at what the general population in the US wants. There's, poll after poll says that people basically want the same sorts of things that he does. But yet the mainstream media constantly spins this really false narrative that what Bernie Sanders wants is unrealistic. And I think that makes people feel like if they support the things that he wants, it makes them feel like they're not right to do so.
Yeah, and that's troubling, since the Clinton election ran largely on healthcare because that was the most important issue at the time.
Yeah.
And we're still nowhere near solving it. They had the interview with Biden the other day where he basically said that if it comes across his desk, he's going to kill it because he'll kill anything that gets in the way of quickly bringing back the ACA.
I think his exact words were, gets in the way of people having healthcare now, which doesn't even really make sense because, we're not going to just leave people without healthcare for any period of time. It will be obviously a transition program. Nobody is going to just be without healthcare.
Well, and that's been one of the big talking points, I think, especially for, Warren's campaign and things, where the big selling point, she took the Sanders plan, the Senate plan that he had put forward, and she pulled a bunch of stuff out of it, and then combined it with a few things from, Lujan's plan in the House.
Mm-hmm.
And she turned around and went, no, look, I'll give you healthcare quickly. I'll do it fast, you won't have to wait. While Sanders' plan very clearly says, as soon as you pass the bill, everybody's going to have access to the transition plan for basically no money.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be 5% of your income cap, while most people are paying 20% of their income for health coverage right now.
Yeah.
So it's outrageously cheaper. and you get it immediately, and they're just benefiting from this narrative that you'd have to wait, it'll destroy everything.
Yeah, nobody ever really bothered to talk about really any specifics of his plan. It was all basically, well, you're gonna take healthcare away from people who already have health insurance, you're gonna raise taxes, it's all gonna be terrible, and how are you gonna pay for it, basically?
Yeah, my favorite part was in the debate where they said, Senator Sanders, how are you gonna pay for this? And he went, well, alright, let's talk about it, but it might take us a couple hours. And everybody's like, well, that's the problem. Yeah, the problem is nobody has the attention span to listen. And the problem is, Pete, that you're acting like anything that's mildly complicated can't be done in the country. Like, that's one of the biggest problems with policy in general. And we see that throughout America in general now. Like, if you can't pronounce something, don't eat it. Well, I eat foreign foods I can't fucking pronounce all the time. They're not dangerous. Just because I'm too stupid to be able to say it doesn't mean that there's a problem with the food. And just because something requires more complicated math than you can answer in 45 seconds doesn't mean that it's bad. I'm really disappointed that he didn't just say 7% payroll tax on companies with more than 50 employees.
Yeah, and speaking of the debates, that's yet another way that the media has been screwing Bernie over, because basically all of the debate questions that he's gotten have been horribly, horribly loaded, and they're basically worded in such a way to imply that he's wrong and to automatically put him on the defensive and make him spend, you know, a good portion of his response time explaining why the question itself is wrong before he can go on to answer basically what the question should be. And there were some really egregious examples of this.
Senator Sanders, can you explain to me why your plan caused 500 trillion deaths in the USSR?
Right, like, there was one where they were talking about pulling troops out of the Middle East, and they basically compared Sanders' position with that of the Ayatollah Khomeini's, and, like, equated the both of them, and, like, basically implied that this was a terrible thing for him to want.
Senator Sanders, we heard that you had a sandwich for lunch. You know who else is eating sandwiches?
Hitler!
Yeah. How can we trust you when
right?
you have so much in common? Like,
yeah,
I wish that was even like a joke, but fucking Chris Matthews and his fucking, it reminds me of the death marches and, oh, Jesus.
Right, yeah, and let me see, I have one of the questions written down here. Senator Sanders, your campaign proposals would double federal spending over the next decade, an unprecedented level of spending not seen since World War II. How would you keep your plans from bankrupting the country?
Okay, wait. Not seen since World War II. Did we go bankrupt then? Or
right?
did we come out of a recession and recover?
Yeah.
I mean, which of those two things? There's no way to know which of those two things
There's literally no way to find out. So yeah, and besides the fact that, you know, World War II didn't bankrupt us, the question is automatically implying that his plans are going to risk bankrupting the country. Which, like, isn't even really a thing. Like, we're not going to go bankrupt.
The debt doesn't matter. This whole obsession with the deficit is nonsense, because we make money, and I think we need to talk to Dave at some point. Dave is one of our economist friends, but we need to have him kind of go into the actual reasons why things like worrying about the deficit are just nonsense.
Yeah, and there were other things like the way there were quite a few questions that basically came down to, what do you all think about socialism? Isn't it bad? And then everybody was just asked to comment on that. And
Can we go around the room and just take turns shitting on Senator
Exactly.
Sanders for a moment?
And
Senator Sanders, would you like to tell us why socialism is the largest bane the planet has ever seen?
exactly. Or like talking about Medicare for All, Bernie is asked to defend the spending or the amount that would cost, and he does that, and then the moderator would move on to Biden, and instead of asking Biden about his plan and what the possible problems with his plan are, which, are many, they ask Biden to comment on Sanders' plan, to respond to Sanders. So that basically sets all of the other candidates against Sanders, and it gives the impression to people watching that his position must be invalid for some reason.
Well, it's not for some reason.
Well, yeah.
It's because it's bad for oligarchs, and it's because we went out of our way to already arrest all of the socialists and get rid of them and move the country really far to the right to make sure that it can't happen. So we're supposed to just understand,
Yeah, and I mean that's there's so much wrong with the way that the media has covered Bernie. Like there's the whole electability issue where he was doing really well in polls before Super Tuesday in South Carolina, and he was winning. But people just kept constantly saying, oh, I just don't think he's electable. What are we going to do? I don't think he's electable. And, Biden was the electable one. Or,
they weren't even playing up Biden before South Carolina.
Yeah, I
right?
mean,
they were basically just accepting that he was gone. I mean, obviously the DNC wasn't. Obviously he was the DNC choice the entire time, which is why immediately after South Carolina, everybody got on board. Because one state that was always going to go to him just made the world of difference. But I don't know how you could really find somebody with a much worse history than him. I mean, Bloomberg had a worse history than Biden. I think of the people that were on the stages in the debates, Biden was by far the worst, least coherent, least organizing, least useful person. He has no real policies. He gives lip service to things like the Green New Deal while being disastrous for the environment. He has a history of turning off everybody. He has a history of horrible voting. His son and the whole scandal in Ukraine. Like, there's no possibility where this isn't going to come back and bite them, and obviously they don't think he's electable.
Oh yeah, I don't think they think he's electable. And sorry, going back to the debates really quick, just because those things piss me off so much, and the way that the questions are worded to automatically be antagonistic to Bernie. I mean, can you imagine if they asked the same sorts of pointed questions to other candidates as they did to Bernie? So, for example, there are numerous studies saying that, Medicare for All would save us money, like, immediately. So, can you imagine if they, on the debate stage, asked Biden, well, these studies say that Medicare for All is going to save us money, so how is your plan going to, how are you going to pay for your plan?
Listen, Jack, that's enough corn pops out of you.
Right? Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't be able to respond to that.
He would tell them to shut up and vote for Trump.
Oh, I mean, I meant, a coherent, legitimate response.
My biggest concern going forward, well, I have a lot of large concerns. I suppose my immediate concern is they just reframed the debate to be a town hall, and now we can't have people congregating in groups with the candidates.
Well, they've already canceled the live audience.
Yeah, how's it now a town hall?
Yeah, I don't know.
Now it's just
presumably they're gonna have people.
It's gonna be three rich fucks reading more questions to people, except it's gonna be a more relaxed environment where they don't really get to talk at each other, so nobody's gonna call Biden out.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's gonna go through, and then let's say that somehow coronavirus doesn't blow up in our faces and cause a giant healthcare crisis that radically swings the election in Sanders' favor. And let's say that Biden ends up the nominee. And every single day, every channel on television is going to have footage of Biden saying, "Shut up and vote for Trump."
You should vote for Trump. You should vote for Trump.
Go vote for somebody else. I don't represent you. You need to vote for Trump. How are they going to get past that?
Trump is going to play that shit on a loop.
We choose science over fiction. We choose truth over facts.
That edited bit of footage where he's like, "We cannot get reelected. We can't reelect. We have to reelect Donald Trump."
Yeah, it's gonna be that. It's gonna be him telling people to vote for Trump. It's gonna be him yelling at that guy in Michigan. Trump is just gonna use Biden against Biden.
He doesn't even have to do anything. He doesn't even have to attack him. If he just takes all of the times that Biden has tried to say something...
Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
And just falling apart.
Right? Yeah.
And plays those for 30 seconds, and then it's just a clip of Donald Trump laughing hysterically. That's enough. That's enough to turn people off. They will be demoralized. They won't show up.
And, speaking of Biden losing it, the media is, suddenly very silent about that.
Think about it.
They didn't used to be. They used to bring it up quite a bit when there were other candidates that were still in the race that were looking like they would be good potential establishment candidates. They were bringing this up. They were like, is Joe Biden up for this? What's going on with him mentally?
I think a lot of people have probably lived through people with dementia. I mean, I'm sure most people have at least known people with dementia, whether it's family members or, parents of friends or whatever. The thing that really I remember is, as my dad was starting to slip, I would go out for breakfast with him, with one of his friends, and they would sit and talk, and anytime a new topic came up, he was fine. He was lucid, his stories made sense, the conversation was fine, he was still bright, he was still sharp, but if nothing changed for a little while, if he was just left on his own, then he would forget that he already told a story, and he would come back to it, and he would repeat the whole thing over again, word for word. He was still practicing medicine for a couple months after that.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's disastrously bad. I don't know why his wife let him do that, but it was hard to really tell that he had this problem unless you were around him for a long time and there was no questions and nothing else. So in a debate environment where they're feeding a question to the guy and he has a limited topic to focus on and he's got a limited amount of time to talk, it's easy to disguise those things. He's got big public performances, rallies and things. Well, I don't know if you can call 200 people a rally.
But even then, he's only got like one event a day.
Yeah, he's got one event a day, and he's only talking for 6 or 7 minutes, and then he's leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And people talk to him about things, and he just gets irate and angry immediately, and that's one of those big characteristics. And it sounds like the guy's always been kind of an idiot dick. Like, back in, was it 88, when he had to drop out of the race because they found out that he plagiarized a whole bunch of other people and basically just stole all of his speeches?
Jesus.
So, he's always been a really arrogant, shitty guy, but it sounds like his degree of frustration and inability to be challenged is kind of a new thing. You don't really expect somebody that thinks they're going to run for president to offer to take a car manufacturer worker?
Mm-hmm.
Like, take him to the parking lot and beat him up. You don't expect that out of a presidential candidate.
Yeah.
Even Donald Trump was like, hey, can we get this guy out of here? They should be careful because somebody might hurt them. But he wasn't like, bring him up here, I'll fucking slap him around a little bit.
Yeah, so like I said, the media was talking about this before, how he seems to be having mental issues, and, now that he's the supposed frontrunner, I mean, I guess technically he is the frontrunner for now, it's suddenly completely taboo to talk about it, and people who have talked about it have literally been accused of being, like, Russian trolls. The media is literally gaslighting us about this.
Can we talk about the whole Russia thing for a little bit? This has just become the go-to excuse for everybody all the time. It's turned into a constant response for anything on both sides, just accusing people of being Russian trolls. You go into any internet forum anywhere, any conversation piece, any comment section in any news article that somebody says something, and the next guy down is like, okay, Ivan, you know, oh, the Russians are trying to help Sanders. That gets played up, and then that gets folded into him saying that Cuba has an okay education system for literacy rates. It's just really disturbing, the amount that we've decided to rely on that when the Cold War is over.
Yeah, so like you were saying about Cuba, there's been a lot of double standards and gaslighting by the mainstream media. So as Cuba, for an example, Obama said basically the exact same thing that Sanders said about Cuba's literacy program, and I believe the media was pretty supportive of him when he said that, of Obama when he said it. And when Sanders says it, oh no, Sanders is, you know, pro-authoritarian communist regimes and all of this.
There was an article in NPR where they were interviewing somebody from Cuba. The guy was talking about how at one point he ended up in a room with Sanders, and Sanders was talking about how he didn't see anything wrong with what Castro had done. And then shortly later in the article, the guy's like, and it's like Sanders doesn't even recognize that Fidel got rid of all of the beauty and wonder that was before this revolution. Like, this is literally a guy who's pining for the slavery days, and like the previous regime that was running around torturing people for fun and cutting off hands and feet and genitals, and just the worst group of people imaginable. And this guy's like, well, Sanders doesn't even recognize that he had pretty buildings and he had casinos that Americans would come visit.
Right. The horror.
And because the NPR wanted to slander Sanders with this story, after that guy says that, they just put it in there. Nobody stops and goes, holy shit, are we really going to put out something that's trying to praise this terrible administration that was so bad that they had to, like, violently get rid of them?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not going to defend the decisions made by the Castro regime, but it was a definite improvement. Everything that's going on in Cuba right now is an improvement, and the number of people that keep coming out going, well, you don't understand, socialism stole my family's slaves,
right,
is disgusting. You see that for Cuba, you see that for China. People are like, my grandparents used to own 68% of the sugar plantations in China. And
yeah.
Great, you used to be, like, part of the problem of the world, and then you escaped over here with your money, and they...
And then, you know, for as far as double standards, there's the whole thing with Sanders' health after the heart attack and Biden's health that we've touched on. Like, people in the media made a big deal about the fact that, you know, he had a heart attack, he had to have surgery, and, you know, Biden is here having, you know, possibly dementia problems. But no, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Biden had a physical exam, and they released it without releasing any sort of medical test, although Sanders had way more complete records released. And they're acting like he's still not done enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, Biden is not at the point where we can just be like, can you draw a clock for us on camera so that we can see that you can still make sense of things? He's nowhere near that stage of gone, but he may be very quickly. And people have been questioning Donald Trump's mental health since basically day one.
Yeah.
About whether he's just, like, extreme ADD and that's the reason he snorts Adderall, or if he's actually just going downhill because some days he just doesn't seem to be there. And having the possibility a runoff where we're going, well, my weird puppet dementia patient is better than your weird puppet dementia patient because only 8 women have accused mine of assault.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And, you know, there's the whole tone policing thing also. Like, people are constantly complaining that, you know, Sanders is too grumpy and, you know, he sounds angry and all of this. But, you know, last time I checked, it was Biden that was getting into people's faces and yelling at them and calling them or telling them that they're full of shit and all of this. I mean, can you imagine if Bernie did any of that? Like, yeah. It would be a campaign-ending disaster for him if he had done one of those things that Biden has done and nobody really cares that he's done them.
Yeah, no, I mean, he never says anything bad about anybody, but Biden still ran a freaking campaign ad that's basically like, look at how grumpy and mean he is all the time.
Right? Yeah.
And he's just like, Biden is, well, we have a very different voting record.
Yeah.
And they're like, he's against Democrats!
Yeah, and you know, tying into the whole Sanders being toxic thing, there's the whole Bernie bro narrative too that just is crazy, and it makes me so mad because, one, he's not responsible for what people say on the internet. He's just not. None of the candidates are. You know, when you're a public figure, you do have some responsibility if what you say directly, like, incites some kind of behavior. So, when Trump says things like, when he says threatening things to journalists, or when he says that, you know, Mexicans are sending rapists or whatever, and if that incites violent behavior, then yeah, he's partially responsible for that. I'm not going to say he's fully responsible because people still choose to do those things, but he is responsible for inciting that kind of behavior. But, you know, Bernie hasn't done anything of the sort. He's always condemned toxic behavior, like, almost to a fault. And he's always saying, you know, I don't condone people being toxic on the internet and any of this. So his actions are not in any way leading to whatever it is that people are seeing on the internet. And so he's not responsible. He's not responsible for what people do. People are weird on the internet. And not only that, but the whole Bernie bro thing isn't actually a thing. Like, it is entirely manufactured by the media. There was a study that came out recently that looked at the amount of negative posting by people who support various candidates, and there actually wasn't any difference between people who supported Bernie and people who supported other candidates. There just wasn't any significant difference in the amount of negative behavior seen online, because everybody says shitty things online. So the whole thing is just manufactured specifically to incite outrage against Sanders, basically, and to make people think, oh, you know, he's a toxic person, and I don't want to be associated with the kind of movement that has, you know, such toxic people associated with it.
Well, and it's really comically absurd that they do that, because, like, there was somebody associated with the Sanders campaign wrote a negative opinion editorial about Biden.
Yeah,
and he apologized for that.
Yeah, and I don't think he even needed to. Like, what they wrote was accurate.
Yeah, so it's okay, like, to attack the candidate in that way. But then when, like, Hillary Rosen basically told Nina Turner that she didn't have standing to talk about Martin Luther King, and to quote him, and people called on her to apologize, her apology was, "I'm sorry for saying those words. Please no need to defend me and attack angry black women."
Yeah, and I believe she did take that particular apology down after a while because it was just so bad. But yeah, that was her initial response. That was her so-called apology.
Yeah, it's just passive-aggressive gaslighting. That's apparently fine for the most part. Like, yeah, she reworded it, but that's the campaign that everybody else has been running, while Sanders is bending over backwards to be everybody's best friend all of the time, to a degree that disgusts me. I am so irritated with him for not being more confrontational about the things that people are doing. We can't really afford Biden. He's terrible on every single issue. And for Sanders to keep being like, he's my friend, and if he wins, I guess I'll support him, it's infuriating.
Yeah, it really is. We could talk probably for hours just about the media shenanigans, but you know, that was just a few examples, and there are many, many more of the way that the media just is constantly portraying Sanders in a negative light and implying that there is something wrong with him and his campaign. But one of the other things that's going on is shenanigans within the Democratic Party. For example, the changes in the debate rules. The first one of those was, you know, to let Bloomberg in the debate, which that ended up being good for us. It was a good thing that he was allowed up on stage and allowed to, you know, set himself on fire and crash and burn. But the principle of the thing remains. They changed the rules because he gave them money.
Yeah, and then later they changed the rules because they didn't want Tulsi on stage.
Yeah, and then they changed the rules to, you know, allow them to sit for this next debate and not have the same format as the last debates to benefit Biden. And the Biden campaign swears up and down that they had nothing to do with this. Like, I'm willing to believe that nobody in the campaign specifically asked for that. Like, I think they might have, but I'm willing to give them that. But the DNC has also decided that Biden is their candidate, so of course they're going to try to make the debates benefit him, even if he doesn't ask for it.
And then in the middle of these constant rule changes, they're pushing the narrative that what separates Democrats from Republicans is that they'll follow the rules.
Yeah.
And that's why we can't get rid of superdelegates, and that's why we can't expect people to say that we'll go with whoever wins, because Democrats follow the rules, and those are the rules.
Yeah, so there's changing the rules, and the whole consolidation of the DNC behind Biden immediately after he won South Carolina, which he was supposed to win anyway. He was always going to win South Carolina, but as soon as that happened, you know, Buttigieg and Klobuchar drop out, and they immediately endorse Biden. There was the story about how Buttigieg got a phone call from Obama right before that happened. So, you know, like, I don't think we know what was said in that phone call, but it's pretty easy to extrapolate. Like, Obama probably said something about how, you know, it's important to get behind one person, blah, 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 you know, tit for tat, all of that. You know, you do this and, you know, maybe we'll support you down the line for something else, or we'll give you a position or something.
You have a long future of politics ahead of you, and as long as you're a party player, then we'll make sure that you're rewarded later when it's your turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, you know, for the first few primaries, and especially after Nevada, Bernie was the clear frontrunner. He was the unity candidate, and I think that if the DNC had coalesced behind him, and, you know, obviously that was never going to happen because they're never going to support somebody who wants to remove them from power. But, you know, if the DNC wasn't corrupt, and if they had been like, well, you know, people obviously like Bernie, so I think, you know, he's the front runner, and we should really, you know, go forward supporting him. I think the results would have been much different. Like, I think Biden would have still won South Carolina because he's just got a lot of support there.
And I think it's important to understand a lot of where that support comes from. Also, there was an article that came out where somebody was talking to a lot of the black voters, and the general opinion seems to be that
among the black community, Sanders platforms, his policies are very popular, but black people don't trust white people to not shit on them.
Yeah.
And they have very good reason for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're going to vote for whoever they think the most white people are going to vote for because Trump is a disaster for them, but not because they actually support the guy. They're doing it because they think that white people are all shit. That's really not a good reason to claim that he's the unity candidate.
Yeah, definitely.
But they're playing these games absolutely reinforces that idea. It absolutely proves that that's the case. And people get on to, Sanders voters for saying things like, well, Bernie or bust. But I don't really know of very many Biden voters who have not said that they won't vote for Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
They are not blue no matter who, as they said. They just didn't care who the neoliberal was.
Mm-hmm.
But they just fervently do not want Sanders.
Yeah. And, it's also another thing that was overlooked even in South Carolina is that black people are not a monolith. Like, that there are differing views even within the black people in South Carolina. For example, the younger black people still overwhelmingly went to Bernie. It's just that South Carolina has a lot of older black people. And, that could have been something that got talked about, maybe, on, some of the news stories. Hey, look, the older guys went to Biden and the younger ones went to Bernie. I wonder why this is. Maybe let's talk about this. Let's have some analysis. No. Black people just like Biden. That's it. They all like Biden. And I think that once Biden did win South Carolina, that was the big establishment candidate win that the DNC was looking for, and they just seized on that opportunity to all get behind Biden and say, well, here is our unity candidate. Never mind that Hispanics don't really like him and young people don't really like him. A lot of working class people don't really like him, other minorities. Never mind all of that. He's the unity candidate. Let's all vote for him. And I think when the DNC just, dropped everything to get behind Biden, that affected the way that people saw the candidates. They now saw that, Biden was the one being backed, and, well, that must mean that he's the one we need to vote for.
And the whole thing is ridiculous because there's still 50% of the voting population doesn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
They don't bother to vote because either they're apathetic or they just realize that this whole thing is a sham. Like, we don't really live in a democracy.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a puppet show. And if we're actually worried about bringing in voters, we're getting a very small sliver of voters for the primaries. We're getting a lot of Republicans turning out voting for Biden. We're getting a lot of voter suppression that's deliberately stopping young people and minorities, anybody that is economically disadvantaged from being able to actually stay in line and get to the polls. 55,000 ballots in Washington mail-in ballots were sent back because of requiring people to, mark Republican or Democrat, or, a signature not being exactly the same as it was on driver's licenses or things like that. So even the mail-in ballot method doesn't work. All of this has absolutely no bearing on who they can actually appeal to in an actual election. And when people keep saying that the only thing that they care about is beating Donald Trump, I think it's pretty much universally accepted by anybody on the left that Biden can't possibly do that. And I just don't understand why that isn't obvious to liberals.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't know how anybody can look at Biden and be like, yep, that's the guy.
I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
That's the guy that's gonna kick Trump's ass.
Yeah, it's Hillary Clinton, but worse with a penis and dementia.
Like, if Hillary
Right.
Clinton was a gross, sniffy person that talked about kids playing with her leg hairs, she would just be, like, sent to a mental hospital. Nobody would want her around for anything ever. Even if she was rich. I don't understand how this guy is even considered acceptable in public.
Yeah, so, I mean, what you mentioned there about long lines, that is the next point that I was going to get to, is, voter suppression. And, when most people hear voter suppression, they usually think about, ID laws and things like that Republicans push. And those are, much more blatant forms of voter suppression. But when you have things like polling places closing last minute all around the state, the two biggest cities in North Dakota yesterday had only one polling place open in each city.
Yeah, they did the same thing for, like, UCLA and things like that, where there's just one polling place for, like, 40,000 people.
Yeah, so people... If people want to vote, they literally have to stand in line for several hours at a time, and a lot of people can't do that. And the people that are most likely to not be able to do that are, guess what? Younger people who are, students and probably, working a job on top of that, or, minorities who are, in lower socioeconomic classes. In general, people in lower socioeconomic classes, basically people who are more likely to vote for Bernie are also the people that are most negatively affected by the closure of polling places. So a lot of these people can't functionally vote. They technically can, but their life doesn't allow them to, and that is voter suppression. People should not be standing in line for several hours to vote.
Yeah, and the kind of people that really need reform the most, like medically fragile people, really can't be out there doing
Exactly,
this.
yeah.
People who need mental health help.
If you have just, anxiety problems, if you have panic attacks, or if you have high social anxiety or agoraphobia or anything like that, can you imagine standing in line for several hours trying to wait to vote? I mean, it would be difficult. It would be extremely difficult, and a lot of people aren't going to be able to do it. And that's not their fault. It's the fault of the system that makes it be so there's one polling place in a whole city. That is definitely disadvantaging Sanders in this whole thing, and I think that's definitely a big part of the reason why he's not getting enough votes. All of those things put together, the media and the shenanigans by the DNC and voter suppression, it makes people feel like it's safer to vote for someone else. Because, the media has spent this whole time telling them how Sanders is divisive and he's dangerous and he's got all these bad ideas, and the debates have spent all this time positioning questions so that it looks like his ideas are bad ideas, and the people that are most likely to vote for Sanders anyway aren't able to make it out to the polls, so that lowers the amount of votes he's getting, and then people look at that and they're like, well, I like Sanders, or, maybe they say I like Sanders's policies, but, I'm not so sure about Sanders because look at this, the media is telling me that all of his ideas aren't actually that good, so maybe I'm wrong, and, nobody's really voting for him anyway by the looks of it, so why should I vote for him? I should vote for the safer candidate.
Yeah, and the degree to which NPR and CNN and MSNBC are basically taken as scripture by a lot of people is really worrying. The amount of people that are still voting for Warren is super frustrating. The number of people...
I mean, I don't know. Some of those might be early voting things.
There are people that are doing early voting for Illinois saying that they're voting for Warren.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And, like,
That's not a cult.
I get that a lot of people are saying, I'm going to write in Bernie if he drops out, because they're not Democrats, and they never were, and they're not okay with Biden. The number of people that are clinging to candidates with absolutely no idea what they represent, you go on Twitter where people are like, give me 2 of Biden's policies, and the answer is like, beating Trump. That's not a policy. Normalcy. I mean, I guess that's a policy, but it's
Sort of.
not.
Yeah. Yeah, so having gone through all of that and how badly the system is stacked against Bernie, I do think that there are some things that his campaign could have done differently.
I think we should probably wait until another one to do that, because we're
Okay.
already basically at an hour.
Alright, yeah, we can talk about that later. Yeah, so basically everything sucks and the system is stacked against Bernie, and that's why people aren't voting for him. Hooray.
Yeah. Anyways, we'll see you guys in the next one.
Solidarity, comrades.